Thank you, Stephen. Is this thing on? Can you guys hear me? All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Tim. I'm an engineer on Roku's web core team. Our team's responsible for the platform that over 170 developers use to support over 100 apps. And all of that goes into powering Roku. My talk's called Taming Roku's Component Library. Let's get into it. That's not supposed to be in there. That agenda is way too big. All right, confession. Our team, I'm really proud. Our team has spent about 1.5 years replacing our homegrown component library with Material UI. And I had intended to tell you guys all about it, but I've rehearsed this talk enough to know I don't have time for that. If I tried to do that, it'd be like trying to fit 30 minutes of content into a 10-minute cup. That was a joke. Thanks. All right, so instead, I'm just going to focus in on leveraging MUI at scale, right? Which is something I think we got right. But before we get into it, can you raise your hand if you used the MUI before or you know what MUI is? Okay, good. Whew. For those of you who haven't, it's the most popular React component library on the planet. But what we're not going to talk about today is why MUI over insert your favorite library here. Right? This isn't an endorsement of MUI. The fact is, the advice I'm going to give you today would work with any component library. And since there's always one of you, please don't be that guy or person who raises their hand and says, why didn't you use Chakra? All right, so problem statement. Leveraging Material UI at scale. It's important to understand the scope that we're dealing with here, right? Roku has over 100 apps, at least when this slide was made, and they have varying requirements, right? We have an advertising app, we have a campaign management platform, right, used by advertisers, very business-focused app. We have the Roku channel, right, which our customers use to watch our content. We also have marketing app, so think www.roku.com, which is really designed to get people excited about our products, right? They have, and from a UI perspective, they have different needs. And we have over 170 developers, and we're trying to hire some people here. So we're growing. There's only going to be more applications, right? So this is really how do we roll out Material UI to help make sure our apps kind of look and feel the same, right? Without getting ourselves into trouble. So this suggested solution is not for a smaller team, right? Just keep that in mind. This is for a bigger scale. So we settled on a two-step solution, right? And we're going to go through these steps one at a time. The first is wrap MUI to avoid vendor lock-in. And the second is to share composite components. We've all heard of dry, do not repeat yourself, right? So maybe we want to make a dialogue once and everyone shares it. So wrapping MUI. Okay, let's think about this, right? This is hard because Roku's big company. So we have to come up with an abstraction over MUI that works for all of those apps and for all of those developers. And that's not going to be easy, right? That's going to require a big team and a lot of work. So we decided, don't do that, right? We're actually, spoiler alert, we're not wrapping MUI. And I know what some of you are thinking, but Tim, that's bad engineering. You can't use a third-party library without abstracting it. Stay with me. All right, so if you're going to wrap something, you have to ask yourself a few questions. The first question is, are you sure, right? You want to take a proven interface and replace it with your own, right? Material UI has proven that it can solve many use cases at scale, right? That's why it's the most popular React component library. And then are you sure you want to add all that indirection, right? So great thing about using Material UI is now developers can self-support, right? And they don't have to, if you add your own abstraction on top of that, then whenever they're looking at docs or searching in forums, they have to go through your abstraction to finally get to what they're looking for. And are you sure you want to test, document, and maintain that abstraction, right? That's a lot of work. We're talking, I don't know, 20, 30 plus components. And then finally, all of you raised your hand, right? That means if you came to work with us and you saw MUI, you feel comfortable. But if you saw Roku UI, right, then maybe not so much. Oh, whoa, what are you doing here, Ursula? If Ursula wants to do it, it's probably evil. We probably shouldn't do it. But it begs the question, right? If it's evil, why do people do it? So let's give a couple reasons and then we will debunk those reasons. The first one, well, we can always change the implementation out from underneath if MUI dies. Okay, really? Like, there's a good chance that MUI will outlive your application. And even if it doesn't, forking's the thing. It's open source, right? You have access to the code. Second, it's going to be really hard to try to line up the interface, right? From old thing to new thing. So let's kind of walk through an example, contrived example. Here we have a stepper, right? On top is Material UI, and then here we have Chakra. They kind of look the same. MUI code, Chakra code. So let's just try to line up the interfaces. Step. Oh, I'm in trouble. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should stop now. So here we have active step versus index. That's how we tell which step is selected. And then we have a label. So step label, step title, or is it step description? And then what is this thing over here? Starting to remind me of this. And I don't think any of us want to maintain this. Next myth to debunk. Well, Tim, if we abstract it, then we can do all of the updates in one place. But do you really, really want to take the newest interface and bend it to fit the old interface? That reminds me of this. Don't do this. And there's a reason maintainers break compatibility, right? They don't just do this for fun. Maybe they want to make the API more approachable, right? There's some benefit. And if you have your own abstraction, then your users aren't going to reap that benefit. And then next, the longer you do this, your custom interface will drift from the underlying interface, right? It's okay from version 1 to 2, but what does it look like from version 1 to 5? So don't wrap MUI, right? Interfaces are hard to get right. This interface has been built with the collective wisdom of the internet. Then again, Twitter also powers that. We won't get into that. And you can't do better. You'll probably mess it up. And documentation is hard to keep up with. Yours probably won't be as good. All right, so next thing. Okay, step 1 did not work, but maybe there's hope for step 2. Sharing composite components. Plot twist, you usually shouldn't do this either. So I want to tell you all a story, right? So we roll out MUI, our first iteration, and I have a developer come to me and they say, hey, Tim, I had to create a dialogue. There's 5 of them in our app. So I wrote a shared dialogue component. Can I contribute it? Can this be the dialogue component for all of Roku? And my answer is thanks, but no thanks. There be dragons there, and I want to show you them dragons. So here we have our innocent little pop-up, right? That works for one team in one app. And then what happens? Well, a designer expresses themselves and says, we don't want the close button. So fine, I'll add a little property, show close button. We'll get rid of the close button. And then they come and they go, you know what, actually, not okay, cancel. Can we do agree, disagree? So I add 2 more properties, right? The okay label, the cancel label. Not too big, not out of hand just yet. Oh, but I want to hide the cancel button. So now it's hide the cancel button, which may have a different label. And then they come and they say, okay, we need to do this. And I'm like, why? Why are you doing this to me? And so the astute among you are thinking that's not fair, right? That's a contrived example. You would never deliver an abstraction like that. You would use composition, right? And that's my whole point. Yes, you use composition, and that's what MUI encourages, right? They provide small composable components. So some advice, some words on composite components, right? Be mindful of your team's bandwidth. If you're going to take this on, make sure that you have the time to support it. Right? If you're going to create the dialogue to end all dialogues, that's going to take a lot of coordination. Push abstractions back on the app team, right? That means the abstractions need to satisfy a smaller scope. It's a lot easier to get a dialogue right for one app than it is for all of Roku. The larger the abstraction is, the harder it is to get right. So it's pretty easy to create a button for all of Roku. It's a lot harder to create a dialogue. And sharing code comes at the cost of coupling. You don't want to have to get 5 teams in a meeting room to argue over how to change your dialogue component. And there are times when composite components make sense, right? For us, it's header and footer. Our header and footer, more or less, we want to be consistent. So then none of those two steps work. So what is the solution, right? We have to, I say, just use the library, right? Share themes, goals, common look and feel, right? And you may need more than one theme. So like I said, Roku.com is not going to look like an internal application. Document your shared theme. We use Storybook, so you can go in and see the components and what they look like. Reference Material UI's docs. Please, please, please don't copy and paste them into Storybook. And then test the theme. We use Cypress with visual diff testing. This gives us confidence that as new versions of MUI roll out, we're not breaking our theme. Stay up to date, right? And this is kind of where it gets tricky because that means people have to do regular updates. But I'd argue it's a lot easier for teams to follow a well thought out migration guide to update their app than it is to try to do some magic in one spot to get everything. And then provide copy and pastable starting points over shared abstractions. So going back to our dialogue, don't give them a dialogue. Give them the starter code for a dialogue, and then let them be free. Now, I've been telling you guys not to wrap, but I'm going to wrap things up. And it's so terrible. I got one laugh. I got one laugh. I've been trying. All right. And I just want to say this doesn't just apply to Material UI, right? You can take this line of thinking and really apply it to any popular library that's out there. And I will close by saying all of the things I said not to do were things we did in our previous component library. Any questions? And I'm probably over, so we can make them quick.
Does anyone have any questions? Challenges? I can't believe no one has any questions.
Yes. How dare you? How dare you, sir? Any?
My question is, why did you use a UI library yourself and not create something that was maybe a little bit more? Because I get your point about kind of building that interface that feels like a little bit of an anti-pattern. I mean, yeah, interestingly, in this scenario, but I think a lot of us who have been at other organizations have maybe said, look, I don't want to depend on any third-party library at all. We used to rip out as many third-party libraries as we could because, you know, it stops being that dependency that's hard to move away from. So what made you think that you liked this dependency enough to basically be all over your code base? Because you're pretty locked in now, right?
Yes. And so that's a good question. Part of it has to do with the investment that your organization is willing to make into something like that, right? And we are not at a point where we have a large dedicated team with a dedicated designer, dedicated program manager. So we decided to leverage what's out there. And another big thing is self-supporting, right? If we pick something, an interface that's well documented and popular, then, you know, less questions in Slack to the small team that supports it on how do I do X, Y, Z, and more of those questions going to ChatGPT or people. But it is, you know, it's definitely not, you know, it's definitely something that we considered. And I'm not sure one is right or the other's, I'm not sure one is right or the other's wrong. It's more about, I guess maybe the takeaway here is, you know, make sure it's small composable components that you're leveraging and not big abstractions, and make sure it's well documented.
I really like that point that you made around not having to go that extra mile and spend that much more money and investment to kind of build, because I think we were always like, oh, build it yourself. And then I think when we were at Sky, we built a big component library all ourselves, and it was worth it in the end, but it was a lot of time consumed. It almost held us back at the beginning, although once we did get over that hump, we were able to move pretty quickly, but it's not an easy task. So that's a really interesting and insightful answer. Thank you for that. Anyone else before we go over to the next speaker?
Was there any issues with designers?
Beautiful question. Yeah. So for those, since he didn't have a mic, the question is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, how did you have trouble, one, getting buy-in from designers, right? And then two, is there limitations, right? And I did work very closely with our designer. And what I didn't tell you, right, is we did not just say, okay, everyone use Material UI. In fact, we consider Storybook as our system of record for components that have been vetted by design. Most of those are Material UI components, right? So for every single, we went component by component, worked to fill our needs, and worked with design to make sure that they were involved in every step of the way. And there may be a day, right, where there's a component that's not in MUI. And then that too will be added to our system of record, which is Storybook, right? But much following the same principles. And Figma, ideally, is the kind of the source of truth for that. And so that's how you know what you can and can't do. It's not in Storybooks, not in Figma. You can't do it, right?
Hey, Tim, I do want to answer that chakra question. Well, I think for us, the biggest challenge is we do have a large number of developers to support. And what we really care about is developer frustration. So we pick the library that the developers really want instead of the most advanced technology out there. And they overwhelmingly want material. So
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Applause, everyone.
Should I break?